Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to K&A Engineering Consulting's first webinar of 2021. Thank you for joining today's presentation titled PMO, One Size Does Not Fit All, presented by Becky Johnson, PMP. My name is Anna Hanley, Director of Marketing for K&A, and I will be the moderator for today's session. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items to ensure our presentation runs as smoothly as possible. Please remain on mute throughout the entire presentation. If you have any questions, type them in the chat box or wait until the Q&A portion at the end of today's session. To start us off, I want to begin with the health and safety moment. February is American Heart Month, a time when the American Heart Association focuses our attention on heart disease, the #1 killer of Americans. Some quick facts to share with you. Over 600,000 people die of heart disease in the US every year. That's 1 in 4 deaths. Heart disease is the leading cause of death for both men and women. And in the US, one person dies every 36 seconds from cardiovascular disease, and someone has a heart attack every 40 seconds. So what can you do? Here are a few tips for keeping your heart healthy. First, don't smoke. Second, eat smart. Control your blood sugar and cholesterol. Get at least 150 minutes of moderately intense physical activity each week. Maintain a healthy weight, and take time to get regular checkups. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Becky Johnson. Becky is a program manager at K&A, serving a major utility client in Maine. She is currently managing their distribution line inspection mitigation program, with the goal of creating a levelized work plan for our client's 11,000 plus line deficiencies. Before joining K&A, Becky had the opportunity to work on projects and events in a few different capacities, mostly in the financial services and a few years in manufacturing. Her experience outside of project management includes leading continuous improvement projects and working as a business analyst. Becky is a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt and a certified project management professional through the Project Management Institute. Please welcome Becky Johnson.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the safety moment and the introduction. I'm excited to be here speaking about my favorite topic, project management. And today we'll go over the benefits of a well-rounded project manager, the importance of understanding the organization's needs, things to consider when tailoring your approach as a project manager or as a project management office leader, and we'll discuss value delivery from our stakeholders' perspective. We've also left enough time for some questions, and we'll provide information on how to submit attending this webinar on the PMI website to gain a PDU. Now, this is not a session where we are going to spend a lot of time talking about technical skills. In fact, we're going to discuss the value of project management beyond the technical skill set, outlining how a well-rounded project manager or project management office can remove the mindset that puts project delivery in a container. And we want to remove those boundaries so project managers can tailor to the organization's business needs. The theme here is to tailor to deliver value and avoid the one-size-fits-all pitfall. Under technical competencies, a project manager needs to manage the scope and the schedule and the budget and all the formalized knowledge areas you see called out in these bubbles. However, as you can see, the visual outlines those important technical skills, but equally important, it calls out personal and business and leadership competencies. Each contains attributes and knowledge important for a highly effective project manager to have. So as we go through the different categories in the presentation, we'll call out attributes within those competencies, filling in the rest of the project management success wheel. As I mentioned in the agenda, for presentation purposes, I've organized this discussion into 3 different categories: understanding, tailoring, and delivering. Understanding is the logical first step for this discussion, and even though understanding is where we start, you'll hear me reference understanding throughout the presentation because it's so important for the success of a project and for you as a project manager. We'll discuss different factors that will likely impact a project, a program, or even the PMO itself. We will also discuss tailoring, which is necessary because every organization is unique, therefore their needs are unique. So this means no project is exactly alike. So it's important to understand which questions to ask and what factors to consider when tailoring your approach. And finally, we have delivery. In order to add value, it's important to build a feedback loop to ensure the project or the PMO is continuously in alignment with the organization's vision and strategy. We'll discuss how proper stakeholder engagement can help ensure you're delivering value throughout the entire project lifecycle. As indicated in the last slide, understanding is our first step for success. With that is the understanding of the organizational environment. So what exactly is the organizational environment and why does it matter? Well, the organizational environment is composed of forces or institutions surrounding an organization that affect the performance, it affects operations, and it affects the resources. There are both internal and external environmental factors to consider. So let's discuss external impacts first. External factors include industry level requirements, competitive landscape, and customer requirements. Now, these are just a few. With industry level requirements, this would be government regulatory agencies. You'll want to know how the type of regulatory requirements the organization needs to adhere to and how it impacts the project. You'll need to know how the project should accommodate industry level requirements. So understand and document and ensure the output of your project does not conflict with the organization's industry level requirements. This could result in backlash from regulators or even fines. The next layer of understanding is the organization's competitive landscape. Take time to understand what the organization's competitive landscape looks like and how the project needs to create or maintain the organization's competitive edge. This factor may impact your schedule or rollout of the project objective. Understand which key features the organization is depending on the project to deliver and prioritize that appropriately. Your project may be a vehicle that gives your organization a competitive edge. Also, consider customer requirements. The organization may be subject to certain service level agreements. Perhaps your project is performing or supporting those agreements directly, or your project may impact the organization's ability to meet those agreements in their day-to-day operations. And because we don't want our projects to negatively impact the organization, it's important to understand those external customer requirements and expectations and the public's perspective on both the industry and the organization itself. So those are just a few external environmental factors to consider. There are also elements that exist within the organization's boundaries that will impact your project or the PMO. Internal environmental factors include culture, mission, vision, resources, and stakeholders. Now, culture, mission, and vision, these are values and behaviors of the organization. It's how the organization goes about doing things. This will impact how team members perceive their role on the project and how the organization itself views project management. So it's important that projects are seen as aligning with these factors. It will likely make implementation smoother and result in higher success rates, especially compared to projects that conflict with the cultural norms. Another key impact is resources. Understand your resource limitations. Your project may rely on the output of team members that are not 100% dedicated to your project. These resources may have a full-time position within the organization. If so, Understand what their dedicated hours are, and that will allow you to adjust project assignments and your schedule if needed. This may also impact your budget if you need to add additional team members to meet your deadlines. Next, we have stakeholders. Our technical skills tell us to identify our stakeholders and develop our stakeholder management plans. However, we can't stop there. We need to understand their perspective of the project or the project management office in general. Project managers may need to do work to gain buy-in, especially if they are viewed as someone that simply facilitates meetings or acts as a hall monitor or someone that just produces logs and documents all day. This is why project managers should seek to add value beyond that administrative or technical skill set. Understanding these external and internal environmental factors it's important because it impacts how the organization makes decisions about the project you're managing. Having a pulse on the industry and the organization itself will allow you to speak the same language as your stakeholders, which is important because you need their support and their decisions to further your project. Complexity of the objective is our next layer of understanding. Objectives are the business goals that the project intends to accomplish. It is what we are set out to do as project managers. However, we should understand the dimensions of the objective. A simple example is if I need to build a bridge from point A to point B. And for visual purposes, let's say this simple two-dimensional square is our first level objective of building that bridge from point A to point B. However, another dimension of the objective may be that this bridge needs to generate X amount of revenue, and this revenue needs to be generated by X date. This adds another level of understanding and priority, which brings me into requirements. A requirement may be that the bridge needs to allow two-way traffic and it has certain load limits, or what's underneath the bridge and do we need to address anything there? A 2020 PMI survey stated that 47% of projects fail to meet their goals due to poor management of requirements. So it's important to get a full perspective of the requirements, or what I like to call a 360 review, if you will. The goal is to understand the requirements in both depth and reach across the organization. And it doesn't stop there. Also, remember those external customer requirements. If your project will impact the customer experience, it would be beneficial to work with perhaps a public outreach team to get a pulse on the customer's expectations and provide information about the project that creates a positive narrative. It's also beneficial to get an understanding of current state, assessing the existing constraints. So these are asking questions like, is there a bridge today? What are the issues with that bridge? Why are we building another one? It's important to ask if this effort has been attempted before. And if it has, why was it unsuccessful, or was it partially successful? If the project was previously attempted, either through the PMO or by someone else within the organization, it would be a mistake to approach a project and assume that those before just didn't accomplish the objective for whatever reasons. Instead, recognize the purpose of the lessons learned and try to understand the limitations and pain points experienced in prior efforts. You will likely face those same challenges, so it's good to know that information. Don't undervalue that transfer of knowledge. You also want to understand the project priority and adjust the project plan accordingly. There is priority within the triple constraints as well as the deliverables themselves. So Project Management 101 tells us the importance of understanding the triple constraints being scope and schedule and budget. But project managers should take it a step further and make it a practice to ask which of those constraints is fixed and which is flexible and which is accepting. Knowing this will help you tailor your approach, your contingencies, and allow you to pivot effectively when changes are required. So regarding outputs, you want to understand the outcomes that are more important to your sponsors, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. But remember, your project may be impacting the organization's ability to maintain or create a competitive edge. Or a certain output or set of outputs may save the organization in labor or prevent a regulatory impact. So understand the urgency of each output and prioritize accordingly. The next factor to understand is your own influence on the project. There is a misconception that proper planning prevents poor performance. This is only true for those project elements within a project manager's control. Identify what is out of your control and communicate those impacts with sponsors often. You can also take it a step further and provide root cause analysis. Drilling in and communicating the origin of an issue may reveal an opportunity for sponsorship to remove that roadblock or create another opportunity for you as a project manager to add value to the organization. At the beginning of the presentation, I showed you a visual of a competency recipe for a highly effective project manager. This is that success wheel. In that we have business and leadership, which are applied competencies which involve understanding business acumen and organizational savvy. This is environmental and political awareness. It's the understanding of business operations knowledge. Also, it's impossible to understand the factors unless we are practicing a personal competency known as communication, which involves active listening and ensuring the quality of information both received and provided. So these are just a few examples of how project managers can apply personal and business and leadership competencies to better understand the organizational environment and the project objectives. Once you understand the environment and the complexity of the project objective, you're in a better position to design a project that makes sense. So as the title of the webinar suggests, one size does not fit all. Now, this does not mean that standardization is bad. That's not what I'm saying. Standards create a consistency or continuity and quality. However, some organizations may be so overly formalized, it takes 15 steps to gain an inch. This is why we want to avoid copy and pasting the same rigid templates and processes. This addresses the misconception that a previous project template is a recipe for future success. Doing this may actually create unnecessary delays and deliverables that just don't make sense for your stakeholders or the organization. On the opposite side of the spectrum, some organizations may operate like the wild, wild west, creating hit and miss outcomes. There is absolutely no way to purposefully recreate success in this type of environment. The organization may also have a little bit of both, a mixture of both that wild west and overly formalized situation. So again, standards and best practices are not bad, but the goal should be consistency in the positive outcomes, not consistency for consistency's sake. To avoid costly time and energy on throwaway work, ensure that work in progress adds value. So when creating a deliverable or an output, ask questions like this. Is the output needed? Who will use it? How will they use the information provided within the output? And is this information already being provided somewhere else? Knowing the answer to these questions will allow you to tailor your outputs and only provide what makes sense for your stakeholders, creating a balance by only producing the right outputs and at the same time creating some efficiencies. As project managers, we want to take advantage of every opportunity to add value, spend time where it makes the most impact, use those cognitive skills to determine what is most appropriate for the project and the stakeholders involved. Applying a one-size-fits-all or a cookie-cutter approach can also diminish the value of the PMO and your position as a project manager if the deliverables do not provide the necessary outcomes stakeholders are expecting. According to surveys conducted by PMI last year, 46% of companies have come forward to accept that they do not understand the need or importance of project management. 75% of companies say that they lack the confidence when it comes to project success. And this is why PMO professionals need to be in tune with their organization's business needs and willing to modify their approach accordingly. So some tailoring considerations. When tailoring your approach to better meet the business needs of the organization, consider PMO type. We often hear there are 3 different categories of PMO type. We have controlling, we have directive, and we have supportive. I feel it's important we take those limitations off the table and customize the PMO performance to better suit the business need. An example, PMOs that are supportive and dedicated to the development of capabilities, that's where their focus is. They may be missing an opportunity to take on a more directive role if the organization needs assistance in strategy deployment. So there's varying levels of value that the PMO can provide, but putting a container or a label around your PMO may limit that value. So instead of putting an emphasis on PMO type, focus on the business needs and how your PMO can rise to that occasion. Our next consideration is PMO maturity level. There are a few different variations of PMO maturity models, and PMOs focused on the objective of hitting that top maturity tier. The mentality is we've hit the top, we are officially mature. But what does that really mean? Does this mean your PMO is running projects through the established process efficiently? You're marking all the checks in all the right boxes from start to finish? And if so, what is the value of each of those check marks, or are they arbitrary? Remember, just because you can create efficiency in process does not mean that process is producing a positive impact. Are you creating unnecessary delays by producing an output or running through a process that does not create a meaningful outcome? So instead, focus on tailoring a maturity model that drives effectiveness, not efficiency. This will change the way you define what maturity looks like in your PMO. Then there's phase management, which is put in place to ensure each project is adequately satisfying the conditions within each phase before moving on to the next one. So when tailoring your approach or considering phase management, there is a basic structure with small variations, or your organization may have specific in-house phase gates. Make sure you fully understand the gates established within your organization, if any, and outputs that must be completed and approved. So you need to understand what the sign-off requirements are and who should be approving that. It may be a sponsor or a committee or a project board. But however, because we are PMO professionals taking advantage of every opportunity to add value, it's important to know the significance of each stage. Don't be afraid to question if moving your project through these phase gates is actually effective, because phase gates can be beneficial. However, you want to avoid the pitfall of relying on the mere existence of documentation within each phase as a metric of actual success. Because phase gates tend to follow a sequential process, ensure the process itself isn't keeping the project from real value delivery. And at the same time, don't rush false positives on feasibility just to move the project forward through the gates. Remember, the real responsibility you have here is to ensure that there is a realization of the proposed economic benefit of your project. Then there is PMO software scalability, which, like some of the other topics, can be an hour-long session within itself. But for this discussion, we'll keep it somewhat brief. Each organization has differing software needs. Smaller organizations may need to spend the money on smaller organizations may not need to spend the money on a fully loaded feature-heavy application, but larger organizations running multiple enterprise-level projects may need that more robust PMO software. So the real takeaway here is to avoid suggesting or implementing a software that is not robust enough to meet the needs of the organization, and at the same time, make sure it's not so overly complicated or feature heavy that you're only using 70% or 70 or 30% of the features. Assess the usability of your current PMO software by analyzing the current performance of key features. Also, keep a pulse on which features or information you will need to properly support the organization's future needs. Next is change readiness. Change is a big topic, but how do your stakeholders adjust to change? This factor can greatly impact the successfulness of your project or projects, so it's important to understand the organization's change readiness. Essentially, you want to assess how capable, how ready, and willing the organization is to undertake a change. This is especially important on enterprise-level projects that will impact multiple levels of stakeholders, both vertically and horizontally within the organization. As a PMO professional looking to integrate a frictionless project, you will want to understand which areas your project will impact and how individual jobs and people will be affected. Which stakeholders will be impacted either directly or indirectly? What are the risks involved in the changes your project will result in? And how will those risks be managed? How much training will be involved before your project can officially be closed? Answering these questions will help you tailor your project approach, your communication, even your iteration pace, and of course, the all-important stakeholder management. Especially on those enterprise level projects that may cause a shift in company culture, change is an important tailoring consideration because effective change management leads to more successful strategic initiatives. And back to our project management success visual, some key competencies applied when tailoring are professionalism and leadership, which includes a proficiency in managing a diverse workforce and resolving issues objectively. This also includes building and maintaining effective relationships. And because we are focused on tailoring, we want to use our cognitive skills and take a holistic view of the project and use the appropriate project management tools and techniques. Emphasis on the word appropriate. Don't overburden your stakeholders and team members developing processes and deliverables that just don't fit the needs of the organization. Remember, one size does not fit all. We identified communication and understanding, active listening, and quality of information, but this also applies when tailoring communication to the audience and improving responsiveness. Remember, you want your stakeholders to be engaged, so ensure you are providing the necessary information and the level of detail that is most appropriate. I also mentioned effectiveness quite a bit, and that is because it's the real goal here. Of course, we want to be efficient, but that efficiency doesn't amount to much unless project managers are effective. Part of the effectiveness and change readiness is ensuring that changes are made at the required pace and maintaining project stakeholder involvement and motivation and support throughout the entire project life cycle. Our last category in this discussion is delivering, and not just delivery, but delivering value throughout the entire project life cycle. The organizational environment is dynamic and it's ever changing. It's important to reassess alignment continuously. According to another 2020 survey, 44% of projects fail due to a lack of alignment between business and project objectives. So the business cases should not be simply developed early on and then left behind, never to be seen or thought of again. You need to account for new competing priorities impacting project resources and reassess the organizational environment often. Consider changes to the organization's strategic objectives, especially on longer duration projects. You may start a project with a strong understanding of the business strategy, of the priorities, and even competitive landscape. But as you know, these factors may change as the project progresses. Include these ever-changing dynamics in your iteration planning. And remember, a method or procedure may comply with all the highest standards and still produce results that fail to meet expectations, especially when the project's environment changes while the project is in progress. Next, we have outcomes versus deliverables. Our sponsors are important, but a misconception we should have in mind when discussing project objectives and priorities is that sponsors always know what they want. This isn't always true. And you may actually have a sponsor or a key stakeholder that is telling you exactly what they want. However, the deliverables they are asking for may not actually result in the outcomes they're looking for. Now, I'm not saying you don't deliver or that you know better than your stakeholder. What I'm suggesting is that at times this can be as simple as semantics, like the example of the word destination versus last stop, and there's shades of meaning. So ensure when you're speaking to your sponsors, in their language, and when you're speaking about the objectives or the deliverables, further your understanding by asking about the outcomes your sponsors want to see from the project. This is what makes a difference because it transitions delivering to delivering value. And while you're speaking to your sponsors and your key stakeholders in terms of outcomes, get an understanding of what success looks like for them. So kind of along the lines of understanding the outcomes they're looking for, but it's a misconception that if a project is within budget and on time, it will be successful. Projects have been executed within budget and on time and have completely missed the mark with deliverables. And although timelines and budgets were met, stakeholder satisfaction may not be what it should have been. If that has happened, stakeholders will likely not see the value in that project, or you as a project manager, or the PMO you support. Only 23% of organizations reported that they are always in agreement when a project is completed successfully. So ensure you are delivering the sponsor's definition of success, not just your own understanding. And of course, there is no way you can account for all the delivery topics we discussed without establishing frequent, meaningful dialogue. Our technical skills tell us to establish sponsor and stakeholder report outs. However, ensure that they are at a cadence that matches the complexity of the project or phase within the life cycle. So if you are in a particularly tumultuous time in your project, you'll want to increase the frequency or establish an escalation guideline. This is about knowing your sponsor and your key stakeholders and adjusting your communication frequency to meet their comfort level. Some more stats from 2020, 41% of underperformers and 17% of champions stated that the main reason why projects fail is inadequate sponsor support. 1/3 projects fail due to a lack of senior management involvement in crucial project decisions. So remember, sponsors and senior leadership cannot properly support you unless we're communicating the challenges effectively. So keep your sponsors and your key stakeholders engaged throughout the entire project life cycle. This is the only way to know that you are successfully tailoring to meet the business needs of the organization and you're still delivering value. So similar to previous categories, delivering value execution means we are applying some key competencies. So first, there is that all-important cognitive skills needed to seek opportunities to improve project outcomes. So remember, speak in terms of outcomes removes the possibility of creating meaningless outputs. Project managers should also have an enterprise view. This means you understand the organization's strategic vision and project managers are leading through that vision. This is done through strategic positioning and systemic program leadership. We also need a productive work environment. And because a project is rarely run with a one-man team, creating a collaborative team culture is necessary. And finally, professionalism. Your sponsors are entrusting you with resources, with budget, and possibly the organization's reputation. Ensure you operate with integrity and demonstrate commitment to your stakeholders. Applying these different attributes in technical, business, and leadership and personal competencies allows project managers and the PMO to elevate their craft. And it's important to have this well-rounded skill set because statistically, higher performing organizations have created a culture of project management. And to be a positive influencer in the project management space, you really want to understand the objective, the environment, and the people your project is impacting. And then tailor your approach to avoid that one-size-fits-all pitfall. To do this, you have to apply competencies beyond the technical skill set. You will also need to apply that business and leadership and that personal skill set. The K&A project management value proposition is centered around providing the right services by understanding the organization's business needs, tailoring services to provide positive outcomes, and assuring we're in alignment with our clients' needs throughout the entire relationship. So if any of the information presented today has been helpful or you're interested in learning more about K&A's PMO capabilities, give us a call or visit our website or find us on LinkedIn. And thank you so much for your time today.
Becky, thanks so much for your insights today on the PMO organization. We're going to move now to our Q&A portion. As a reminder, type in your questions in the Q&A chat box. There's a couple that have already come in during the presentation, and I'll continue to monitor for new questions as they arise. So Becky, the first question we have for you is relating to project objectives. How are these objectives impacted by the maturity of an organization's project management office program?
So how is the level of maturity for that PMO impacting the objective?
Yes.
Okay, sure. So there's a couple of different components there to consider. So when you're thinking about the objective and whether or not the organization is ready to complete that objective, the first understanding is a maturity that's or a greener or a sorry. So an organization that has not maybe a formalized PMO, but they're working projects, or it's a newer PMO, they're a little lower on the maturity side, which isn't necessarily negative. Maybe they're just running ad hoc projects, or they're just a little greener in that space, that they may struggle with getting the objective to the finish line as quickly or as efficiently. And this could be due to the fact that they're trying to actually stand up the project management framework while they're trying to run the project through that framework. So that takes some extra effort to try to stand that up and run it through. Another impact, if you have an organization that has a lower level PMO maturity, would be the organization itself. If they are not project management focused, running that project through and getting stakeholders to participate and collaborate, because you really need that brain power, may be a bit of a struggle because their time is focused elsewhere and that project effort may not be the priority. So I think that's probably two examples of some of the biggest impacts for a greener or more of a ad hoc approach to projects or running projects. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Yeah, I appreciate the insight on that. We actually do have another question I was going to pose to you.
Okay.
It came in from Raha on the chat. It says, what are the key challenges we are facing when we implement the PMI standards in your projects and mitigation plans? It's pretty broad question, I think.
It is. It's loaded too. So let's say if you are working on a project, and again, goes back to the organization's culture. If they are not a culture where they support project management, they may view project management standards as just a lot of unnecessary red tape. You might see a project manager walking down the hall and everybody else runs because it's the project management police. So that might be a part of the impact there. So you might struggle with trying to say, okay, this is a planning session, this is a working session, these are the communication plans. So getting people to even pay attention to those deliverables that come out of that technical skill set may be a challenge. But again, which is really the big theme, or a part of the theme of this webinar, is understanding how to get buy-in. And you really want to speak to the sponsors and the different team members in a language they understand. It's about building those relationships. And I feel like once you have those relationships, you have that trust, you're speaking the same language, the organization knows that that you get it, you want to be there to add that value. You might have a little bit of an easier time actually standing up those different standards and frameworks because people need to see the value of it. So project managers, their job should not be just managing projects, but it should also be champions of the project management standards. And you can't do that by saying, I'm a project manager and I go by this phase, this phase, this phase, and that's the only value I'm bringing to the table. Instead, project managers should speak in the language of the business and apply the concepts where they make sense. And then people will start to see the positive impact of what you're doing. And it makes implementing those PMI standards a little bit easier.
Great answer, Becky. Such a broad topic to cover in a question, but thank you. So we have another question that's come into the chat. The question is, how important is it to get formal project management education in order to be a successful PM?
Yeah, that's also a loaded question, I feel. So you might have somebody that has been running projects for years, I mean, a very long time, and they may not have that PMP certification, but they definitely have the experience. They understand the business, they speak the language, they understand the environment of their industry. So they are so they're running projects proficiently, and they're creating, you know, positive outcomes within the organization. So if it's not broke, don't fix it. At the same time, you have people that are really interested and focused on understanding project management and understanding the craft and the technical skill set behind project management. So I think that it's important to get the PMP or to get some understanding what PMI stands for, because as businesses and the environment changes, the organization's needs are going to change, and PMI and having those types of certifications and those PDUs and those trainings allows you to adjust with become abreast of all the new practices and trends that are out there within the skill and this craft, and will allow you to better support as business changes. I mean, as organization needs grow.
Great answer on that, Becky. So I have a question for you. It didn't come into the chat, but one I was just wondering is, how often do you think that you should check in with an organization's objectives? You talked about kind of the changing environment as you're going along in your project. So do you have a recommendation on some type of cadence, some frequency maybe that you'd want to check in on those organizations' objectives?
Sure, there's a couple of different considerations. You know, there is, you know, how long is the project going for? Is it a 1-year project? Is it a 3-year program? There's going to be a lot of changes that are happening in the environment on those longer duration projects, so it's important to tailor to that. But if it's an agile project where you have iterations, you may want to include that type of assessment or review within each of those iterations. Especially if you have a project that has a lot of complexities, you're pumping out a lot of different features, so the needs may change in a shorter duration because you're pumping out more work, more features for the organization. So you may want to include that in your iteration planning. If you are working more of a waterfall project or even a hybrid where things are kind of on autopilot and they're running smoothly, you may not need to check in as frequently. But I also mentioned, you know, if there is a phase where your project is running a little bumpy, you've encountered some unknown or unforeseen issues, you'll probably want to meet frequently and make sure that you are still on the same page and that this project is running true north as you walk through those challenges. So it depends on phase, it depends on duration, and but most importantly, it depends on your sponsor's comfort level. So if they are if they're feeling a little shaky about the project, you're going to want to speak with them more. You want to talk to them, make sure that you are still meeting the business needs of the organization, make sure priorities haven't changed, make sure that the environment hasn't changed, that so that just making sure that you're on the same page with the stakeholders continuously. So I don't think there's one answer that you can copy and paste to all. It depends on the organization.
Right, and I think if anything we've learned today, the copy and paste method probably isn't the best approach. It's all about tailoring, right? And meeting your customers' needs. So we do have another question. Actually, it's in regards to K&A. It says at K&A, what is the organizational strength of the PMO office? In other words, is it projectized, a balance matrix, etc.? And is it controlling, supportive, or directive?
K&A is flexible, they're agile, and we're going to perform whatever service at whatever maturity level, at whichever PMO type is going to be most beneficial for the organization. K&A really wants to understand what the needs are so that they can tailor their services to add the most value. So if you're an organization and you have a PMO already standing up and it is having just struggles with some of the projects that they're running, not for anything maybe out of maturity level, but because of resources, we're going to come in and we're going to meet you where you are, and we're going to continue on as an extension of your organization. If you are an organization that doesn't have a PMO and you're looking to stand that up, then we would be able to come in and assess what the organization needs are at an enterprise level and tailor to do what makes the most sense. Again, I can't say this enough. We would not copy and paste. We want to do what makes sense.
Thanks, Becky. Great information. I don't have any more questions right now in the chat. There have been actually a couple I've not published in regards to obtaining the presentation. So we do have plans to take our recorded webinar and put it on K&A's website. If you haven't been to our website, it's KA Power, and you might want to check it out to see some of our other offerings. I don't think we can actually give out a copy of the presentation, however, so that is something I do need to check with PMI to see if it's something we can release. So we'll try to get that answer out to the broader group. Is there any other questions coming into the chat? I will say we have a little bit extra time. At the very end, we are going to give some instructions on how to turn in for the PDU credit that the PMI is offering for our webinar today. So if you hang around for a few minutes, we'll provide that information at the end of the presentation.